community? What could we have done? What did I do? I will tell you predominantly my experience is people fear leaving their house. They don't feel safe anywhere, not even there really. So it's hard for people to get services unless someone goes to them, right? And that people also don't know what to do. They don't know what to do next. At that point, personal belongings can be returned. I don't know if you've ever seen things that happen like that, but people run out of their shoes. So there's usually a lot of shoes that need to be returned, depending on what kind of event it is. So those are some things that happen in the first or the secondary phase. They're not all of them, but those are some of the things that happen. I can also tell you that not only do people struggle with not feeling safe about leaving, they feel this thing which is going to sound kind of strange, but they feel guilty about surviving or responsible in some way for the event. Especially if you think about the impact around the perpetrator, was I his school guidance counselor? And I say he because that's usually their male. Was I their best friend? Was he on my baseball team? Did I work with that person? Could I have done something? And then if I was there and I survived, why me? Why did I survive? Maybe somebody else should have survived. I don't understand why I survived. That makes sense? So then we have the long-term effects. And what we know about a mass shooting is that it can trigger people's prior trauma or loss. Trauma can interfere with the grieving response, so it can take longer, be more complicated. People's perception of the world is altered, which means that they don't have the same, it impacts their sense of trust. And when your sense of trust is impacted, you're not likely to seek out new social situations. You may rely on the ones you have, but going to see a behavioral health provider may be too much, right? Because I don't know if I can trust that, because I don't trust the same way I did before this happened. Does that make sense? So court proceedings could occur at this time. Ongoing investigations occur. There is a need for trauma-informed practices to become in place in a community, which means collaboration between clergy, law enforcement, schools. There needs to be an increase in behavioral services in general, because you'll see in a community that the behavioral needs go up after an event in the long term. They'll be needing to plan for things like the anniversary of the event. And unfortunately, there'll be a need to have understanding around the fact that the next event is going to trigger the people in the community. There's going to be a trauma response in that community when the next mass shooting occurs. So those are some of the things that happen. So basically, it's having the community adjust to a new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Joelle. And Sarah from Mosaic.
May I go over to your podium, Sarah?
You may.
Thank you. So I have to write out what I'm going to say, so I couldn't stand up and fumble around with my pages here. So I'm Sarah Lewikowski from Mosaic Counseling. We've been in the area for 42 years. We were formerly TCM Counseling, if that sounds more familiar to you. So I'm going to talk to you about a few things here. First, the topic of mass shootings in regards to mental illness. The majority of people, as you actually mentioned, with mental illnesses are not violent, and they're far more likely to be the victims of violent crime. A small number of people with a mental illness may be harmful to themselves or others. Many people who have been shooters have experienced childhood trauma and had a crisis weeks preceding the shooting. This might have been a crisis with a relationship or financial, something happened at work, maybe a victim of bullying or feeling like they're a victim, feelings of hopelessness, or maybe harboring grievances. So in preparing for today, I came across a partial interview with Sue Klebold. She is the mother of Dylan, one of the two teenagers who went into Columbine. And he, Dylan, and his friend Eric, they ended up shooting 36 of the students and staff that day, and 13 of them died. But she was, in an interview, she had talked about how he had just gone to a senior prom, how he'd been accepted to 4 colleges, that she had no idea what he was planning. But he was 17 years old, but in reading a journal of his when he was 15, he wrote that he was in so much agony he wanted to die. And she also went on to say that she believed for him something was just broken. Something wasn't right with his thinking anymore. He had lost access to whatever tools he had for self-governance, reason, logic, and concern. And that she also went on to say that she can't back away from the conversation of how many mental unwellness intersects with violence. So mental unwellness can intersect with violence. That she doesn't think that we should be afraid of having that conversation. She wanted to say we need to put some boundaries around the discussion so as not to unfairly characterize all mental illness as linked to violence, which would increase the stigma for people with mental health issues. So following a mass shooting, this can be a dangerous time because there is so much demand for quick answers, which we've also heard a couple panelists say. What really leads to a person to do something like that? It's so complex. Media people, they look quickly to mental illness, and this can just perpetuate the thought that the mentally ill people pose a danger to others just because they have a mental illness. But all mental health providers and various agencies or in private practice, they can play a vital role in assisting people in the community, from family members, survivors of a shooting, to other people in the community not even directly affected, but they're still affected. A wide range of emotions that are really individualized for each person. And if there is a previous trauma, then that event can likely trigger emotions just even being part of the community. And people in the community may have an altered perception of their safety and be hyper-vigilant, which is understandable. This can lead to having trouble building trust with counselors. Recovery from a mass shooting can take years. If you've seen in the news, there have been suicides following shootings several years later. And most common are mental health outcomes after mass shootings, PTSD. And that symptoms of PTSD might look like agitation, irritability, self-destructive behavior, social isolation, maybe flashbacks, fear, severe anxiety, mistrust, loss of interest, pleasure in activities, guilt. It's a lot of things, insomnia, nightmares. Also grief, depression, anxiety, these are other outcomes. Alcohol and drug use, abuse, panic attacks, social phobia. And it's important to have a crisis response team. People to evaluate the psychological needs of the family, the victims, the community, and connecting them to a range of services that meet their needs. And according to an article regarding the mental health consequences of mass shootings, 5 important principles for mental health responses to mass trauma included promoting a sense of safety, calming, a sense of self and community, connectedness, and hope. So some recommendations: trying to identify root causes of mass violence and develop strategies to prevent them. Greater access to mental health services, including emergency crisis services. Reduction of stigma. And communities can focus on strengthening relationships, schools having social and emotional curriculum, supporting social behavior and emotional well-being. And minimize exposure to traumatic events and create protective factors. Teaching resilience, regulating emotions, coping skills, teaching parents to model nonviolent behavior to their children. Education on teaching positive ways to deal with stressful events. Establishing cultures in workplaces, schools, churches, that if people know, and that for people to know the warning signs that someone could be suicidal or homicidal, and a way in which people are comfortable reporting. Bob, you mentioned that too, about people being suicidal and knowing what are the factors that someone could be suicidal. Knowing that if someone just doesn't have, they're so hopeless about themselves that they don't care whether they live or die. Like not having the plan at the end where they're going to be getting out, someone doing a mass shooting, they know what's going to happen. They're okay with that. So in conclusion, I want to end with another statement from Sue Klebold. If I can find it, just a moment. So ultimately, Sue believes we must get quiet and listen to one another. She said, I think we have lost our ability to do that. She says the goal as community members, family members, and adults in our youth's lives is not to make them feel better, but simply to help them feel, to identify their feelings and learn how to respond. We might save their lives, she said. So now more than ever, when we're in the same house, building, even room right now, we're still really far apart from each other. And with our phones, you ever texted someone across the room? I mean, we're far apart. So let's be present. Let's pay attention to what's going on around us so we can notice things